Okay, Daisy, where's your ball? Get your ball. Where is it? Go get your ball. Find it. Find it. When you bring me your ball. Mine. It's my ball. Mine. Mine. No, it's mine. It's mine. Oh, it's mine. Bark, 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 bark. Are you my kitty? Angel is this one. And she'll hop out of the cage and everything, waiting for him to get there to give her something. Oh, she's so excited. Oh, yeah. Yeah, everybody likes their treats. There you go. Oh boy. This is a house, chicken house Otto built. And he didn't even have a blueprint, he just built it. This is where the egg nests are in here. So he just lifts that up and gets the eggs out. And then the door here, the big door opens and he just can just clean out the chicken house, put it into that trash can there and go and pick the trash. It's all cleaned out. I know. We love old chickens. My name is Doris Carolyn Sutherland. And then I was married to the girl's dad, which made me Doris Carolyn Allen. And then after he passed away and 8 years went by, I married my current husband, Otto Bozarth. So now I'm Doris Bozarth. And I was born in 1939 in Perryton, Texas. And I was born in my grandma's house. And it was around Thanksgiving time. I wasn't born on Thanksgiving Day, but my mother was still in bed from my birth on Thanksgiving. And so the family all came in and introduced to me while my mother was still in bed recuperating. Of course, you had to stay in bed a long time back in those days. You didn't get up in 3 days. Every so often, my birthday still lands on Thanksgiving Day. It didn't this year, but it will every so often. And we lived in Perryton and in Texas. Went down to South Texas a while, but lived in Perryton around 4 years old. We were living in Oregon. We moved to Oregon then, and my sister was born there, and I'm 5 years older than her. I remember her being born. I remember the time. They wouldn't let kids in hospitals back in those days to see their babies or anything. So when she was born, Daddy took me up to the hospital on the outside, and it was on the ground level, and Mother came to the window and she was showing me, she said, she's about this long, she said, talking about my baby sister. Up until that, I didn't even know my mother was going to have a baby. You just didn't say things like that back in those days. Little kids just didn't know till once there was a baby in the house. I was 5 years older, and my dad, he worked for different things, and when the work kind of played out around Perryton, well then we went to Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and he worked in the shipyards there, welder, and my mother worked in the shipyards. I have a picture someplace of them both in their welding. They used to wear these helmets that came way down over their faces and everything. We lived there until first grade. The war was over then. It's 45. The shipyards closed down somewhat. So my parents decided to go back to Texas, but they couldn't just go. They couldn't afford it. So we went to Northern California, and I was enrolled in a little school there that all the classes were in the same room, like old-time school, you know, but it had the 6th grade, the 5th grade, and all that. But I was still in the 1st grade. My folks, we got a little house or apartment, these little fourplexes that they have around in here, you know, and we lived in there, and they picked grapes. The grape season was over. We went a little farther south, and we did the same thing, only my dad and mom picked hops to make beer out of, you know. They picked hops. And we finally ended up back in Perryton, where I finished the 1st grade and went to the 2nd grade. Then we moved to Amarillo, and I started in the 3rd grade there at Forest Hills Elementary School. My dad built a house there, and I went to school until I was going into the 8th grade. We lived in Amarillo, and we lived alleys between my aunt and all my cousins and me, and we always had such a good time because my cousins were
a little older than me, but still old enough to play and have a good time. Their older brother, he loved airplanes. And he went out to the Amarillo Air Base, went out there and got an old hull of an airplane, and he drug it up next to their house in a vacant lot, and he just didn't want us girls playing on that. It was just an old hull of an airplane, but it had the wings and the, all this. He didn't want us playing on that. Well, 4 girls, 5 counting my little sister, but we played on that airplane all the time. But he didn't like it, and then he also built model planes to fly, and he didn't want us going in his little old building out in the back, and we did it every day. He'd get so angry at us, but he couldn't do anything about it. We had a lot of fun. We played together, and anyway, we'd go trick-or-treating together, and back then we'd go all over Amarillo, that end of Amarillo. Didn't even think about having to have an adult with us. Me and my cousins, every kid did. Nobody, you didn't have to have an adult go with you. The worst thing that happened was we knew this one place, you didn't ever want to go there, because if you walk up to their porch, their kids were on their porch on the ceiling and they'd pour water on you. So you didn't ever want to go to that one. But everybody knew which one that was, and so you avoided it. The first one that went, they didn't know, but then after that, everybody else knew. Yeah. But we'd ride our bicycles all over out there, and we just played and had a good time. And then my dad decided to move out to San Diego. I started into the 8th grade when we moved out there. I love San Diego. If I had my wishes, I would live there. I love it. I love the weather. I love all the things you can do there. My sister, of course, still lives there. We lived there, and we lived in Imperial Beach, right outside of San Diego. Imperial Beach was right next to the border. Our high school was the nearest to the border of any high school in California. It was almost a new school, and we just lived a couple of blocks. I walked to school every day, and the school was one end of the street and the ocean at the other end. At night, you could open your window and you could hear the breakers rolling in. Oh, it was so soothing. Even as a young kid, I thought that was the most soothing sound of those breakers rolling in. When the tide was up, if you stood out in the middle of our street, you could actually see the breakers. That was only at high tide, otherwise you couldn't. I loved it. I had so many friends there and good girlfriends, and I loved my school and graduated there. I graduated in June of '58 and got married July of '58, and I was 18 years old. People were gentler, and I'm not saying there wasn't any crime. There was. There's always going to be crime, but you weren't afraid to go anywhere. You could go anywhere and not be afraid. Downtown, down in San Diego, along the beach, we would walk up and down the beach, down around Coronado. We never, just us girls, we never were ever frightened. Nowadays, you're afraid to do anything like that. Right. I think that's probably people were not as violent, a little gentler, I think. I think people were more inclined to go to church and live by the standards that God had for them. And then nowadays, they don't feel that inclination. I think that made a big difference. The schools, the kids were kinder. There was, I'm not saying there never was any bullying, but there really wasn't a whole lot of bullying or being mean to kids and all this kind of thing. There wasn't that. I guess as a young girl, that's what I mostly think of. And maybe that's why I love San Diego so much, because I didn't have any fear there. I could walk all over the Imperial Beach, and we did. We didn't have cars and stuff, so we walked. Me and my girlfriends would walk all over and never had a fear of anything. I loved it out there. We could go to the ocean, and the same day drive up to the mountains, play in the snow. To me, that was just awesome. And we did that before, just so we could say we did it. And they had a ferry that would go from San Diego to Coronado. Now they have this bridge, and they still have a ferry, but it's not the only source of transportation. But back then, you had to go all the way down to Southern California to where we lived here at the very end at Imperial Beach, and go around here to the Coronado Island over here. You'd have to do that to get there, otherwise you had to ride the ferry across. Well, we'd park the car, and we'd ride the ferry back and forth and back and forth. We'd go down at the beach all the time in the summer, and in the winter we'd go down too. We'd walk around. It cold, but we'd have to we'd wear our tennis shoes. And
What did Granddad do?
he worked at first. He worked as in airplane companies. Then, as he got older, I think it was a little harder for him to do that. So he was a janitor at the school, an elementary school. The kids just loved him. They would fight over who got to sit by him in the lunchroom. Every time one of them would come up, the other one would say, "Scoot." So the other one would scoot, and she'd sit there and they'd scoot. And pretty soon they got down, and this one little kid said, "I don't have any more scoots." But when he retired, they named a rose garden after him, Herb's Rose Garden, and I have a picture of it somewhere at the school. They gave him a plaque and the plaque said, "Roses are red, violets are blue, the best janitor is you."
Oh, that's wonderful.
So he was a sweetheart too. My dad loved to go fishing. I used to go fishing with him. He was a very gentle man, loving. We'd gone fishing, Daddy and I, and he had caught this big stringer of fish. He had several fish on it. So he was gathering up his stuff to go home. And I was playing it along the river there, and I took that line of fish and I would throw it out and pull it back. I threw it out and it got out of my hand, and that whole stringer of fish went down the river. My dad, to tell you what kind of guy he was, he just died laughing. He said, "Well, I won't have to be cleaning fish today." He was such a gentle guy. And then when I was real little, I'll tell you how really nice he was. He had an old car out there, and I went out, and he had left the gas tank lid off or something, I don't know. Anyway, I filled it up with dirt. I didn't get a spanking for it. He was a sweetheart. Mom was a sweet woman too. She was a sweetheart too. Mom decided to go bowling with all the ladies, and she was practicing in the house one day, and she'd take her bowling ball and she'd go back and she'd make her lunge with her, take the steps, 1, 2, 3 steps, but she wouldn't let the bowling ball go, except the last time. She let it go, and it went over and banged into the wall. Didn't it? Big old hole in the wall. Oh. She had a bunch of house plants and she said she couldn't figure out why in the world those plants were smelling so bad. And she just could not figure it out. And one day she looked over, she saw the cat was using it for a litter box.
Oh no! Oh no! How did Granny and Granddad meet?
Dad worked across the street from my grandparents' house. Now it's a park, but it used to be a CCC's camp, and that was one of those work deals that they made before the war. To give guys something to work on. They would go out and work on bridges and roads and stuff like that, the CC's camp. Well, my grandmother did laundry for the CC guys. If they didn't want to do their laundry, they'd bring them over there to her, and she would do their laundry for them. Well, Dad happened to be one that came over to get his laundry done, and he met Mom. So Mom was 17 when they got married. Dad was 5 years older, so what would they make, about 23? They lived around Perryton, and Dad did work and everything after he got out of CC's. And then I was born then when Mom was 19. It was in California, right after we'd gone out there. They lost one when we lived in Chula Vista. A little girl, Pam, was born first, which was devastating, and then they thought they'd try again. And the next couple of years later, they had a little boy, and the very same thing happened. The baby's tube that the baby should breathe through to go into the lungs, it went into the stomach instead. So the baby couldn't get any oxygen. So the baby died, both of them, from the same thing within 2 years of each other, and it was very heartbreaking. I was probably 13,
14.
Yeah, I was probably about that, and then the 2 years later, so I was probably close to 16. When we lived in Imperial Beach when the last baby was born. But we were really devastated because Dad, of course, he had liked to have a son. The little guy didn't make it. So and it was just weird that both babies were born with the very same condition,
Right.
And it was really heartbreaking for them. Grandpa Shepherd is my mother's dad. His name was Clarence Shepherd. He married my grandma. My grandma had been married previously and had 3 children. Then he and my grandma married, and then mother was grandpa's first child. He loved to ride motorcycles. And in fact, he had a motorcycle that had a sidecar. And grandma and the kids rode in the sidecar, and then one would ride behind grandpa and hold on to him. That was their transportation for a long time. They didn't even have a car, but then they finally did get a car. It was an old coupe. I remember that, and just had the one seat in it, little short. I would go to church with them, and I would ride in the front seat between my grandma and grandpa always had spearmint gum, and every time he'd give me a stick of spearmint gum before we got to church. Going to church with my grandma is when I first felt the tug in my heart for the Lord. I went with her on one Sunday night. That little church, they would kneel to pray. You could go forward and pray, but they would just have a time of prayer, and most everybody would just kneel at their seats. So my grandma and I were there, and we both were knelt back in the congregation area there at your seat. Grandma had been praying, and I was sitting there, and she turned to me. She says, "Honey, would you like to get saved?" I said, "Yes." And so she prayed with me and led me to the Lord that night. I've never regretted it. He's been a wonderful friend to me.
That's a wonderful.
And I'm not saying I always lived perfect life, but he has always been perfect for me. But this is when I was just a little kid. I was like, say, in the 2nd grade. And I never forgot that. It imprinted on my mind and on my heart. The way my grandma was real proud of me, and my grandpa was real proud of me. I know he was the treasurer for their church for years and years. And he'd bring the money home with him and sit on the couch after Sunday school while everybody was getting the dinner ready, and he'd sit there and count the change and, add it all up and get ready to put it in the bank. I was helping him one day. I said something about money's the root of all evil. And he said, "No, that's not quite right." And I looked at him, he said, "It's the love of money that's the root of all evil." And I never forgot that. It stayed right here in my heart. Later in years, I wrote a letter to my grandpa and told him how much I appreciated him and the fact that he had lived a Christian life for his family all these years and was a good example. I guess that meant a lot to him, because after he passed away, somebody found that letter in his Bible and they gave it to me. Whoever stole my Bible, they stole it. I really hated that, because that was something that I treasured from him. He thought enough to keep it, and I wanted to keep it. I thought that was kind of interesting that he kept that letter. It made me feel good. He and another man there at Perryton actually worked on that gear shift thing. They, I don't know the whole story. I don't know what happened, but 2 different things that the 2 of them went together and were building. The friend, patented both of them under his own name, and so my granddad didn't get any portion of the proceeds from that. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something, mechanic, because my grandfather, all of his life, he had a shop that he took care of alternators and generators. But when they were first married, Grandma and him, they lived out before the town of Perryton. There was another town out there by the cemetery, Old Perryton. Anyway, my grandpa ran the movie projector for the movie house. They lived in a little house. It was not very big, but it had a lot of happiness in it.
What would you say is the happiest time of your life?
I think the years that I lived in San Diego before I was married, when I was a kid. That was I was a teenager, and I didn't have a lot of cares. I had my family loved me, and I had a nice little sister, and I was happy at school and happy where I lived, and I had a little church I was happy in, and you don't have any cares then. You don't have to worry about getting out and getting a job or all this stuff. And I think that's probably the happiest that I've been. I think that's why I look at San Diego and think, oh, I'd like to go back. I'd like to live there. But all things being equal, that's nothing I could do, but that's kind of where I get that. And of course, having Nelda live out there makes it nice when we go out. We can see. I took Otto around and showed him my high school and where we lived, and all that out there, you know, and it was fun to go back to those places and show Otto all those things too. And then I met my dear husband here after your dad died. I didn't ever think I'd remarry. I never looked for a husband. Didn't think there's any decent guys out there that I would be interested in, frankly. I wanted a Christian man, and I wanted a good man, and I didn't know if there's any of those in my age group out there. Otto went to church with where my uncle pastored part of the time, and he knew my uncle and aunt. His mother went to church there. Going to church, I met him. I don't know, we just got together. He come up here. Oh, I know, he came to my mother's, what was it, her 80th birthday that I gave her a party.
Yeah.
All my relatives came, and my sister and all her family, and Otto came up. That's when we kind of got acquainted, actually. I knew who he was, but I didn't really, of course he was married up until the year before we met. His wife had died.
Another
This is
little
my
one
best
here.
friend. Her name's Daisy. This is Daisy, and she is my best friend. She's my little sweetheart, and I love her. And we go out and play ball all the time, and she doesn't like to be cuddled. She wants to be free. She'll lay on your lap, but she doesn't want you to hold her tight. She wants to be free to go chase everybody and kiss everybody.